In this video, I'll walk you through an optimized way to create realistic grass and plants in Maya using Mesh. By the end, you have a scene filled with different plants that will make your render look much more realistic. Let's jump right in. If this video helps you, consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. It really motivates me to make more tutorials like this. I'll add a quick index so you can skip to specific sections if needed, but I recommend following the whole tutorial to avoid any mistakes and get the best results. The assets I'll be using in this video come from the Quixel Megascans, a huge library of ultra-realistic 3D assets creating using photogrammetry. They have a ton of high-quality models and textures, most of them free, and already optimized for your projects. I picked this texture I liked, clicked download and selected 4K. It's always good to find a balance between quality and optimization. If the texture is close to the camera, 4K might be the best, but if it's further away, a lower resolution works just fine. Honestly, I never used an 8K texture, but hey, you do you. Make sure to set your project in Maya so that all files are properly linked. If you don't know how to do this, I have a short tutorial on my channel explaining it. So basically, objects and assets go to the assets folder, and textures should be replaced in the source images folder. Now, let's import the grass models. Simply go to File, click Import, and your project folders should appear. If they don't, set your project. I'll import my FBX files one by one. They might be too big, so I'll scale them down using the R key until they look right. I like having variety to make the scene feel more natural, but this depends on the project needs. Oh, and don't forget to save. Now I'm applying a basic V-Ray material. Since I'm using V-Ray for rendering, I'll show you how to apply a basic V-Ray material. If you are using Arnold, follow the same steps but with the Arnold material instead. Let me know in the comments if you'd like a separate tutorial on that. So, steps to apply a V-Ray material. Select the object, press the right-click button on your mouse and choose Assign a new material. In the window that pops up, go to V-Ray, Surface, and select the V-Ray MTL. Now, in the attribute editor, rename it to a better organization. For example, I'm using grass_MTL. MTL stands for material. Now, let's add the three essential textures. The diffuse, that is our base color of our object, roughness that controls shininess, and a normal map that adds surface detail. First, the base color. Under basic parameters, find diffuse color. Click the checker icon and choose File. Load your base color textures from the source images folder. Set the filter type to off, it's probably set to quadratic. Now the base color is done. Let's get the roughness right. Under the reflection tab, enable use roughness. Increase the reflection color to white. Click the checker icon next to the reflection roughness. Load the roughness texture. It is a black and white image. Set the filter type to off, and now we add an extra step. You change your color space to raw. Now let's go to the normal map. Under the bump and normal mapping, set the map type to normal map in tangent space. Click the checker icon, select File, and load the normal map. Again, set the filter type to off and color space to raw. If you are using the Quixel assets, the textures work across all models in the same pack. Instead of assign a new material, just choose assign existing material and select the one that you just created. Let's do a quick test render. Okay, it looks good. Now let's scatter using Mesh. First, make sure you have your file organized, everything well renamed. This is important to maintain the project organization and prevent chaos. Notice in the top left corner in modeling, you'll need to change it to FX. Now select the mesh option up here. In Create Mesh Network, click on the little window here on the right. This will open this window, and here's a very important step. Typically, your mesh is set with the mesh option on. You should select the instancer instead. This will make Maya process each grass as instances, something that exists in space but is processed simply as a presence. This will greatly optimize your project. Now you can copy my settings. You can click Apply and Close. Notice that the selected objects became hidden, and that's normal. Also notice that a new object was created in the outliner called Mesh1. This is where you'll control the scattering from now on. Notice that some are already scattered across the scene, but you can select them, precisely because they are in instancer mode. That's great, they are not processed as objects but as instances. Well, to start we select Mesh, and in the attribute editor we have all the parameters we can choose from. First, we'll go to Mesh Distribute, where we control some settings related to the quantity and distribution of our instances. In the distribute type, we'll set it to Mesh. Meanwhile, it's important to open the Mesh editor in the Mesh tab, where we can add new nodes to our instances. I prefer it this way as it becomes more organized. Going back to our distribute, we need to specify where these grasses will be placed, and for that, we'll need to put that information in the input mesh. To do that, grab your floor and drag it onto the input mesh. Done. Now the grasses are spread only across the surface of the plane we choose. Now let's go to the mesh editor and add an ID. Right after that, we'll add a random node by clicking the plus icon and selecting random. The random node will be responsible for making everything more randomized, but in this case we only want this to happen in the vertical rotation of objects. So we'll set the X, Y and Z positions to 0 and increase the rotation we want, in this case the rotation Y. This will make the objects have a random rotation that goes from 0 to 180,000. Which is the maximum possible variation. Let's go back to the distribute and increase the number of points to see how our scene will look. For now, I'll set it to 1500. If your file is lagging a lot, it's probably because you didn't set it to instancer mode as I mentioned earlier. Well, as you can see, moving the timeline, the plants don't move at all, but I would like to give a slight movement very subtle to our plants. For this, we go back to the Mesh editor and click on Signal. The signal will dictate how our object should behave in space. By default, they will look like crazy fleas. But once again, we'll make sure this only occurs in rotation, as if the wind was carrying the objects and not their position. So we'll reduce the position of X, Y and Z to 0, but here in rotation, increasing it. We immediately see that creates a realistic movement. The number I find the most suitable for this scene, which has a little of wind, would be 3. This creates a subtle but perfect movement. However, I will change the signal type from 4D noise to trigonometry. This way it gets a slight bend that makes more sense in this case. Well, now I want to determine where my grass will be in space. I want to create a small dirt path on the left of the altar, and I don't want any plants on the altar, on the stones or even on the tree. This will add realism and also optimize the scene, since it won't be completely filled with plants. To do this, we'll go back on the Mesh editor and click on Visibility. As before, we'll grab our ground and place it on the Map helper. You can notice that automatically change the map projection from Y to UV. We have our ground defined again, but we need to specify where grass will and won't appear. For this, we'll create a black and white map where white will indicate where grass goes and black will indicate where no grass will be. To do this, select the ground, right-click and select Assign New Material. Don't worry, your previous material won't disappear. We'll see later how to reapply it. The Lambert is completely white, so we'll need to modify the map to show where it should be black and white. To do this, press the space bar, go to the texturing and press with your right-click 3D Paint tool and click on the small window next to it. If pressing space changes your perspective, just quickly press it again to return your previous view. Now, a new window will open. This will allow us to modify our ground. At first, I can't paint because I need to click Assign and Edit Textures. Leave the settings as they are here. Click Assign. Now you can modify the texture, and you'll notice it's all grey, but we'll click the float paint with color on white to make everything white. Now we'll set the color to black and start painting where we don't want plants to appear. In my case, it's here in the altar and here on the stones. The texture of this ground looks a bit repeated because I roughly opened the UVs, but yours should be fine. If not, leave a comment and I will try to help. In this scene I'll have trees and other things, so these grass gaps in the back aren't very concerning, nor those in the front since the camera won't catch them. When the texture is ready, it will look like this, with black and white zones as we intended. Close the window and to return to normal, click W. In the attribute editor, go to the texture we just made and rename it to something easy. I will call it grass_placement. Now we can return to the texture of our ground to how it was. To do this, right-click and select Assign Existing Material, then select the name of your material. In my case it's ground_MTL. Yours might have a different name, so check what you named it before. Now we'll open the Hypershade to import the texture we just made. Don't worry, it's quick and easy. Click this blue icon up here. This will open Hypershade. I know, it looks kinda scary. You can see our material represented up here. I have two because I made one before this video to ensure it works. But that's not where we are interested. We'll go to the Textures tab next to Materials. Here is the texture we just painted. Going back to Mesh and in Visibility, scroll click on the texture and drag it onto the strength map. Attention, be really careful, it must be with the scroll mouse button. That's it, now plants won't appear in the black zone of our texture. I'll increase the distribute a bit to see how it's looking. Yep, it works. Our scene is gaining more strength. I'll increase the number of points a bit more. Now to finish, I'll add an influence node in a mesh editor. This will be responsible for further optimizing our scene and more precisely determining zones with more abundance, size and strength. This is useful for my case because I want to highlight areas like this trunk or the side stones. This way it will make them more noticeable. After clicking the instancer node, notice a new object was created in the outliner. It's called Mesh 1 Influencer Lock, represented in the viewport with this purple locator. We'll create several to determine zones of greater influence, but it's important they stay locked to our ground. So we click on the ground and select this magnet icon, which will lock everything from here to the ground. Now press W and we select that locator and move from the central zone. You can see the influence, right? If you move along the Y-axis, the locator will leave our ground. So move only on the central zone, the locator's pivot. The magnet thing is so strong that even if I try to move out of the plane, it won't let me. That's great. Now let's understand this influence better. If we click R to scale, we see the larger we make the influence, the larger the grasses in the locator will be. Clicking E, we see rotation can also have influence. I won't use this feature in this scene, but you are free to do so. Going back to Mesh, Influence, we see the list of influences we have created with this mesh. To create more influences, we simply right-click and select Create. I'll repeat this several times, maybe like 10. Notice as I make more influences, they group and sum their influence on the grass, making it gigantic. We select the influences and spread them across the scene in areas that we need more or less grass strength. I want to give more emphasis on the side path and other things on my scene, so influences will be excellent for creating this strength and form. Now in Mesh and Influence we can determine the general influence power. This will alter how influences generally react. I'll leave it as I think best. Now, if you notice, the plants no longer move. This is because the influence is the last node determining how the plants react. To restore animation, in the Mesh editor, grab the Mesh Influence and place it between the ID and random. This keeps it organized. At the end, I created more influences at the bottom to cover the horizon line of the plane. Now it's done. The same method can be applied if you want to scatter stones, trees, dirt or many other things. Again, don't forget to save. Let's see how our render turned out. Okay, nice, I think it's looked very cool. I want to thank whoever watched until here. Leave a like and subscribe if this video helped it in any way, and leave in the comments things that you'd like to see and doubts you have. This means a lot to me, really. Stay creative.